So I'd like to welcome everybody to today's webinar, where we're joined by academics from the UCD School of Philosophy. And today we're going to be discussing the taught master's programs within the School of Philosophy. And we'll also be joined by our academic Fred Cummins from the School of Computer Science to discuss one of the programs that is jointly delivered. So I'd like to pass over now to Professor Brian O'Connor, the head of the school, who's going to take you through 3 of the programs, and then we'll take the other programs in sequence. So thank you for joining.
Hello everyone. So it is a great pleasure to be the head of the school at the moment. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the school, and it'll help you to understand where some of our programs are coming from. If you've taken a look at our website, you'll have seen quite a few staff members listed, and that reflects the fact that we are the largest philosophy unit in Ireland by quite some distance, with 19 people teaching full-time on our programs. And what's really special about our group is that there's a great variety of interests. We're not a narrow school by any means, but we're large enough also to be able to offer sort of clusters of specializations in various fields of philosophy. So the word people often use for us is that we're a pluralistic department, in that we don't have very rigid views about which particular type of philosophy should be taught. We teach a whole range, from the European traditions to the analytical traditions to ancient and historical philosophy, and more scientifically oriented philosophy. So that background is particularly relevant to the first MA I want to talk to you about, which is our general MA, or the pure MA in philosophy program that you'll see on our website. We call it the Pure Philosophy MA program there, but it's simply a general MA. So as with all of our MA programs, you take 6 courses or modules, as they're called, and during the summer, after the first 2 semesters or trimesters, you write a dissertation. If you're taking the general MA, you're going to be able to choose from absolutely anything we have to offer, because you're not choosing to specialize at that point. And what's attractive about this program to many people is that it gives them an opportunity to develop their philosophical education. Perhaps they already had an education in philosophy, but was rather narrow, and now they want to broaden it. Or perhaps they didn't major in philosophy, perhaps minored, and want to build up a depth of philosophical knowledge that they couldn't get as undergraduates. Because we're a broad department, we can offer people a range of choices that are probably far in excess of what they ever anticipated. This program is very good, as I say, for helping students to deepen a knowledge of philosophy that they've already begun. But another forward-looking side to it is that it sharpens up their research skills, their ability to deal with difficult texts, difficult arguments, to write complex texts, and to write extended pieces, which will be ideal preparation for anyone who wants to undertake further studies with a research dissertation, like a research master's or a PhD indeed. And we've seen many of our MA students over the years go on to further study in PhD level, because they've acquired many of the skills and have gained the confidence to take on work at that level. So then just then to round up the particular appeal of the general MA for many of our students, again, it's the opportunity to familiarize you with a range of philosophy, to begin to explore and possibly deepen a particular area of philosophy. So because you can choose any 6, you might, for example, choose 2 or 3 that are in roughly similar territory. It gives you an opportunity both to specialize, but to keep your options open, or you can keep them open entirely. That's the general MA. The second one I want to talk to you about, though, is very different, really, in that this is the Philosophy and Public Affairs MA, which is based in the school, which is run by the School of Philosophy. And you are expected to take 3 of your modules, or 3 of those taught lecture courses or seminars with us, but you're obliged to take 3 others from other schools within the College of Human Sciences, of Social Sciences and Law, I should say. The College of Social Sciences and Law is easily the biggest of its type on the island, and it has a huge number of different expertise areas and subject areas. And with our program in Philosophy and Public Affairs, we have arrangements with the schools of politics, of equality studies, of geography now, of sociology, and of a various range of social justice studies. And people can undertake studies in topics that really we don't do in philosophy. So the question is, why do we encourage students to do philosophy and areas of social sciences that are outside the area of philosophy? Well, it's an interdisciplinary degree, and the objective is to give students a broader sense of social questions. Philosophical approaches to social questions are just one kind of approach. There are many things that we're just not competent to deal with, like the empirical basis of many of our social phenomena. We don't do on-the-ground research, and as a result, we haven't theorized upwards from what you find on the ground. So there are experts among our sister schools in the College of Human Sciences with which we have this arrangement. At the end of your 6 modules, you'll write a thesis, as is the case with all of our programs, and that will be in an area of philosophy. But what we've invariably seen is that when people go to write their dissertation, it bears the hallmarks of their experience in other schools, where there are considerations in issues like, for example, gender studies or family studies that they acquired from what they learned outside of the School of Philosophy. People who've come into philosophy and public affairs often believe it'll be the ideal education for them if they go towards areas in, for example, non-governmental organizations or in public service. And you can see why, because it gives you some of the things that philosophy specifically does, was broadening your access to a whole range of social phenomena that are expertly dealt with in other schools in the College of Social Sciences and Law. That's that. And then the last degree stream I want to talk about is that in contemporary European philosophy. Now, the School of Philosophy has a special reputation in this area of philosophy, where there are 6 or 7 of us who have various levels of interest in contemporary European philosophy. And it's been the leader on the island for a generation easily, and it's the biggest department of its kind, either in Ireland or the UK, where there is an interest in European philosophy. You take 4 modules that are designated for this program, and 2 from the other range of options on the philosophy curriculum. This one has been particularly successful in preparing students to go forwards for PhD studies. I know not everybody should enter an MA with the intention to go further, but nevertheless, it can be a very important bridge education for those who perhaps studied philosophy, but not as much European philosophy as they would have liked, and realized that they needed to kind of build up that body of knowledge before they went any further. There are more specific things I could say about the content of what we do in that European philosophy stream, but I don't want to get into excessive detail. You can see the various modules described on our website. What you'll see there, if you're not already quite familiar with the terrain of European philosophy, is that within it, there are lots of different traditions, and indeed rival traditions. It's not always a question of European philosophy versus, say, analytical philosophy. European philosophy itself has its own internal rivalries and tensions and traditions. And there again, we are proud to say that we're pretty pluralistic in that we have a range of modules that really deal with all of those different strands within the European tradition, French traditions, German traditions, phenomenological traditions, and more politically oriented ones. Many of our students have come to us from abroad for this program because it's quite unusual, for example, in North America, to find a 1-year, as they call it, terminal MA, where you study simply for 1 year get a degree and are not obligated to go further into your PhD. And they've been able to use that qualification to study elsewhere. So those are our three programs. I hope you've heard something of interest, and I'll be online after my colleagues have finished speaking to answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brian. So I would now like to hand over to Professor Roland Stout, who will also take us through two of the programs within the school. Thank you, Roland.
Thank you very much, Emma. So I'll start by perhaps mentioning something more general, because not only am I the program director for the MA in Ethics, Theory and Practice, but I'm also essentially in charge of the administration of the MA programs altogether in the school. And that means that I, along with my colleague Danielle Petherbridge, and usually a third member, are the little committee who consider applications to the MA. So I'll be able to answer any questions anyone has about whether they are suitable, whether they would get a place on one of the MA programs if they applied. And I'll say one or two brief things now about that. Essentially, for the philosophy programs, and this won't apply so much to the cognitive science one that Fred Cummins will describe at the end, you do need to have some philosophy background. There may be a little bit of room for maneuver as to how much philosophy background you have to have, but you have to have a significant quantity of philosophical undergraduate experience. And the reason for that is that this isn't going to be easy for people who haven't had any philosophy before. They'll need to be able to think clearly, analytically, and have some background in philosophy to really handle the MAs. That having been said, there is an option for people who haven't had any philosophy in their undergraduate degree, but who are very interested in philosophy and want to do a philosophy MA. And that's what we call the extended MA. It's a 2-year program where you'd have essentially a 1-year conversion course where you do lots of philosophy modules, undergraduate modules from the School of Philosophy. And then after that, you're automatically enrolled in one of the MA programs for the 2nd year. If you're interested in that, the best thing to do would be to contact one of us, especially me, and just email me, and I can explain the details more clearly. It's on the website, but it would be better to have a better understanding by talking to someone in person. So that's the idea of doing one of these MAs if you haven't got the background. If you have got the background, essentially a 2-1 degree or first class degree will be the basic prerequisite. There are exceptions, so we consider people who have different kinds of degrees, or who have, say, 2 degrees, but they have written extremely interesting piece of philosophical work, and it's clear to us that you'll be able to do the MA no problem. So each person is taken on their own merits. There isn't a kind of automated system of application. Okay, so I'll talk about the 2 MAs, one of which I'm in charge of, and the other of which I was involved with the starting up of a few years ago with Professor Maria Bagramian, who's the program director for that MA. That's called the MA in Consciousness and Embodiment. And it really utilizes the strengths of the school that Brian O'Connor has just talked to you about, namely that we have this unique strength in areas of philosophy from European philosophy, in particular an area called phenomenology, where one is considering the nature of the mind, if you like, or the nature of consciousness, and its relationship with the body and embodied experience and so on. And we have several people working in that area. We also have people working on the philosophy of mind in a more analytic kind of spirit. And putting these 2 things together has given us, and would give students who take this course, a really interesting kind of overall sense of how the mind works in the world, if you like. So it's a philosophy of mind MA. You have to take certain modules within the school which are related to the philosophy of mind, also phenomenology or existentialism, and certain slightly less central but related MA modules. One thing I would say about this MA is that there is an opportunity to, in some ways, design it for yourself. So Maria Bagramian, who is the director of this MA, would be able to talk to you about which kinds of modules to direct you to. And she's quite interested in taking people who've done relatively little philosophy and still taking them on this MA if they're directed to the MA modules, which are more easily accessible for those who haven't done much philosophy. So there's room for maneuver with that MA. You can decide to do different modules if they're suitable. Now the second one I want to talk about is the one that I'm the program director for, and it's called Ethics, Theory and Practice. And it's brand new. This year was our first year doing it. And we're developing it all the time. And it's an MA we've developed in coordination with a research center that we've developed in the school called the Center for Ethics in Public Life. And it's really a way of getting people to think about ethics philosophically. And again, we have a lot of strength in the school within the area of ethics. We have several people working on different aspects of it. And in that MA, you would take at least one core module called Ethics, Theory and Practice, which is designed specifically for that MA. You would then take at least two modules from the ethics side of the school. So there's philosophy of emotions, there's philosophy and literature, there are other modules that have a specific ethical dimension, as ancient ethics, for example. And then you would take another couple of modules from the philosophy school. They could either be ethics modules or they could be anything else. They could be something completely unrelated to ethics. But also you have to take one module from outside of the school in law, politics, psychology. We have a range of different schools who offer modules in more practical ethics. And there you'd be applying your ethical thinking in a non-philosophical context. And really that's part of the point of this MA. It's to bridge the gap between academic theoretical work and more practical thinking about ethics in public life, as it were. On top of that, you do the dissertation, which is common to all the different MA programs we're going to be talking about. But of course, with this one, it would have to be on some theme within ethics broadly construed. Okay, I think that's all I have to say, but I'm very happy to pick up on questions afterwards. So I'll pass back to Emma.
Thanks very much, Roland. So I'd like to now hand over to Dr. Lisa Foran, who will take us through the next programme, which is the MA in Philosophy and Literature. So thank you very much, Lisa.
Thanks, Emma. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to say a little bit about the structure of the course and then what might be interesting in the course for you. As with all the other taught MAs, there's the taught part and then your dissertation. So the Philosophy and Literature MA has 3 parts that you have to complete. So you have to complete 3 modules in philosophy, 3 modules in literature, and then your dissertation to make up the 90 credits. Within the philosophy modules, you must do 1 core module, which is philosophy and literature, which I teach in the 2nd semester. And then you choose 2 other philosophy modules. And then within the 3 literature modules, you must choose 1 that is in literary theory, and then 2 other literature modules, which can come from either the School of English or the School of Languages, Cultures and Linguistics. So you can take modules in German cultural theory or history, in the American novella, and so on. Within philosophy, you can take modules in philosophy of the emotions, Merleau-Ponty, critical theory. There are a number of different options each year. The idea behind bringing these two disciplines together is really to reflect how close they are. So one skill we seek to develop in our students is the capacity to use philosophical skills in analyzing literature. Philosophy has a long history of using literature as an illustration of a philosophical problem, so possibly using a short story or a novel to unpack an ethical issue. But it's also important to see philosophy and literature as disciplines or practices that reflect their own particular historical point. So we might ask questions like, why is it, for example, that we have the kind of literature we do in the early 20th century? And how is that connected to the kind of philosophy we see emerging? What are the connections between pragmatism and the modern novel, or between phenomenology and surrealism, for example? But the other thing is to ask what actually happens when we describe disciplines in these terms as philosophy or as literature. And this is the focus of the core module on this MA stream, which is to ask, how do we decide what counts as philosophy and what counts as literature? And that's what we look at in the literature and philosophy module. It's an unusual taught program. Despite the deep connections between these disciplines, it's difficult to find programs that bring the two of them together in such a rigorous manner. The other advantage of this program is that you become part of the very rich community at UCD Philosophy that Professors Stout and O'Connor have already referred to. We have visiting speakers. We have a regular meeting of all our graduate students, both MA and PhD level, and you would be encouraged to take part in that and present your research as the year progresses. We also have an annual philosophy and literature graduate conference, which is run together with UCD and Trinity College. So you would be encouraged to take part in the conference and possibly organize that. So in addition to the taught modules that we offer and the interdisciplinary nature of the masters, you would also become part of a very rich and lively community of graduate students. If you have any questions at all, I'll be here at the end of this webinar, and you can of course also email me. Thanks very much. And back to Emma.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks very much for that insight on the MA program. So finally, I'd like to come to Associate Professor Fred Cummins. I'd like to introduce him. The next program we're going to discuss is the MSc in Cognitive Science. So if I'd like to pass over now to you, Fred.
Thanks very much, Emma. I'd like to share my screen if that's possible. There we go. Can everyone see that slide? Yes. Okay, thank you very much. So the MSc Cognitive Science is a very unique program, somewhat unusual in the UCD context in that it's administered by philosophy and computer science. We also have significant contributions from the School of Psychology. It's a highly interdisciplinary program. Maria Bergamian, who's been mentioned several times there, is co-director together with me in computer science, and Fintan Costello, who is a cognitive psychologist. We've been running for about 20 years now, and still very hard for me to say what cognitive science is. We usually have to advertise it as the interdisciplinary study of minds, brains, and behavior. I'd have to say that we don't know what any of those words mean, though, and the degree is to a large is occupied with querying these. In that respect, it's neither like a pure philosophy degree nor like a pure science degree, in that cognitive science must be philosophically informed or it's not doing its job at all. There are a lot of contributing disciplines, not just our two. So psychology contributes, philosophy, of course, artificial intelligence is an emerging concern. Robotics, we've learned an awful lot from that field. We have a small neuroscience program in UCD, and neuroscience is obviously relevant if you're going to be talking about brains. Linguistics is very, very relevant in the broadest possible sense, and anthropology, which is neither philosophy nor science, but nonetheless extremely important. We're a relatively small program. We take in about 10 students a year. The intake is very broad. We don't have a preconceived idea of where our students should come from, but we do require some substantive grounding in a relevant area, and each application is treated on its individual merits in this regard. We're often mistaken for a different kind of degree. This is not a psychology degree or a clinical degree, or much less cognitive behavioral therapy. We get confused with those all the time, nor is it an artificial intelligence degree. The manner in which we lay out the concerns of cognitive science is extremely interdisciplinary, and is not beholden to any one fixed view of the relationship between the knower and the known. And with that, I hope the philosophical themes that never leave us are apparent. The structure of the course is a little different from those in philosophy. Most of our modules are 7.5 credit modules. Students typically take 4 of those per trimester, and they complete a 30 credit research project in the summer, which is again a little bit different. It's more oriented towards the scientific format in that you do a literature review and you produce a final report, which is a submission to a technical conference. We have a core suite of 8 modules, which I will now list, but we are quite willing and frequently do substitute and amend this to suit the prior learning and particular interests of individual students. Modules in the first trimester are the Introduction to Cognitive Science, which I teach. Some students in the Embodiment and Consciousness degree also choose to take that. An Introduction to Cognitive Psychology, which turns out to be quite a distinct kind of enterprise. From the School of Philosophy, you have Consciousness, Agency, and the Self. And we also have from psychology, the Fundamentals of Cognitive Neuropsychology. So very basic foundational stuff here, but very broadly pitched. In the second trimester, then, we have some more focused modules, Connectionism and Dynamical Systems. I teach that one. Fintan teaches Cognitive Modeling, exploring a variety of approaches to modeling tasks like decision-making, planning, and so on. From psychology, we have the Readings in Visual and Social Cognition, a module in which you're confronted with state-of-the-art journal articles. And then I teach a module which is very odd. It's Embodied and Enactive Approaches. It expands the variety of approaches that one can take towards the business of cognition and knowing from a deep root in philosophical biology. This module is also of very great relevance to those taking the embodiment and cognition degree, of course. Some of the peripheral modules that one might consider substituting include the cultural mind, computational creativity, human-computer interaction, and Merleau-Ponty, and such substitutions are always done in consultation with the students. The way we have designed this degree, it's not simply speaking a vocational degree. We have lots of those in computer science. This is designed for those students who have one eye on the possibility of progressing to research. That might be a PhD, might be involvement in research, or it might be just staying up to date with research. Because it's a one-year program with a broad intake, we don't replace anyone's original professional orientation. If you come in as a linguist, you leave as a linguist. We can build upon that, we can enrich it, but we can't change it completely. My email address is there at the bottom. All queries about cognitive science and UCD can go through there. And I'll be happy to take any questions at the end. Over to you, Emma.
Thanks very much, Fred. So that concludes our panelists today in terms of the overview of the 7 programs that we were presenting here. We've had some questions in already that I'd like to just put to the panelists. But firstly, one of the questions that we have got in is in terms of the university position on the COVID-19 response and how the university is preparing to deliver teaching. So in terms of incoming students to UCD, we remain committed to delivering the best face-to-face teaching and campus experience where possible within public health restrictions and guidelines for the next academic year. So the School of Philosophy, the School of Computer Science, and all the schools within UCD, we're all making preparations to welcome our incoming students in September, and we will be including blending online delivery with small group interactions with lecturers and access to the library and other UCD facilities. For graduate students, The academic calendar for the first trimester, the autumn trimester, will begin on the 21st of September. And as I said, it is a very fluid situation, so we are developing our plans and responding as the weeks go on. So in terms of the delivery of specific modules, more details will be available from the school directly in the upcoming weeks. So we have a university site, the COVID-19 website, that is frequently updated, and that's where you can get the most up-to-date information. I would encourage you to refer to this site. I've just popped that in the chat box now. So we've just had a few questions that I'd like to put first to Roland, if that's okay. So in terms of the part-time options that are available on the philosophy, could you just speak to how they differ to the full-time option, please?
I forgot to unmute. Part-time options are available on all our programs. Essentially, you're doing a 1-year MA in 2 years. But the modules take place at exactly the same time as the full-time modules. So you're not doing evening modules. You still have to find some time during the day to do these modules. So it's a matter of, especially if you're working part-time or full-time, you still have to work around the schedule that way. And we are going to try and develop, but probably not for this year, but for next year, an online module in ethics. So at least one of our modules is going to get taught online, which is of course more convenient for people doing part-time work, but that won't be available straight away. So just put that on hold for another year. Otherwise, it's more or less exactly the same. So you just have to do 3 instead of 6 modules during the year. It gives you, because you can pick 3 out of this quite wide range of modules we offer, you can to a certain extent determine what times of day you're going to be coming into college, or which days of the week you're going to come into college, so you don't have to come in every day of the week. And the dissertation takes place in the second of the 2 years in the same kind of way as it might do for someone just doing a 1-year MA. Brian, have I got that right?
Absolutely. And just to add to the sense of the flexibility, because you're going to take 3 modules per year, it means you in either year you'll be taking in one semester 1 module and in the other semester 2 modules. So if you are part-time, because you have particular constraints from work or home commitments, for 2 of the semesters, the most sort of amount of time you'd have to devote to being on the campus will be 1 afternoon or one morning. So it is pretty good in terms of allowing students to undertake an MA around all of their other important commitments.
Yeah.
Thank you. And in terms of actually one question about ethics, I might put to you, Roland, as well. Are ethics modules available throughout any of the other MA programs that have been discussed here?
Yes. So even the one that's specifically for this module, for this program, the ethics theory and practice, can be taken by anyone doing any of the other MA programs. So each program has certain required modules, but there's always some optional programs that you can pick from the wide range of modules we offer. And certainly all the ethics modules that we have are available to all the programs that you might join.
Just questions around the dissertation. Brian, I might put this to you in terms of the submission dates for dissertation. Do you have to be in Dublin? Is it in when dates for that?
I couldn't tell you precisely the submission date now, but you're absolutely right that once students finish their classroom work, which is usually by the end of April, they can leave Dublin if they wish. It's possible, particularly as we've now become so used to Zooming, to have supervision meetings with their academic director whilst no longer in Dublin, and to submit the thesis, by post. We don't yet have an electronic system of submission for the thesis, but if you are anywhere that you can print out a thesis and put a cover on it, you can stick it in the post and send it to us. Yeah, it's an interesting question because perhaps people worry about the cost of living in Dublin more than they, and staying here for longer than they need to. That's certainly no reason to stay beyond the end of April. But we'll have to watch out a little bit for next year, given the disruption of COVID-19. There may be minor adjustments to our usual academic calendar. That should be clear soon enough, though, and there will be lots of information on the university website for people who are curious about the academic calendar over the first 2 semesters.
And we had a question just in terms of progressing to PhD options. I suppose how students might go about sourcing a PhD through the School of Philosophy after their graduate studies.
So I'll speak to that. Well, it all depends on what area of research you want to undertake. Generally speaking, the PhD is a specialized subject. You don't really go into a general PhD. You have to really know what area of philosophy interests you. Some people choose to come to us who've never been with us before for the PhD, or we have MA students who stay on. You know, they've formed a particularly good academic working relationship with one of the lecturers and believe that that's the right person to help them forward in their interests. But we're also very good at helping students to make good decisions about going elsewhere. And we have I think, a very illustrious record of seeing our MA students go to famous universities all over the English-speaking world once they finished with us. But what we really are confident about, and I must say personally, the MA program is something I've always been very proud of in our school, is that the standards are high. People really do have to work quite hard, but they are wonderfully trained by the end of it. And when they go about making applications for PhD places elsewhere, I think the quality of what they've learned is evident in their applications. And that's why we have such a high success rate among our MA students in getting PhD places elsewhere, as well as remaining in UCD.
Thanks, Brian. So Fred, if I can just put this question on the cognitive science to yourself, about the possibilities of auditing other modules, both in the School of Philosophy and Computer Science, the modules offered.
Yeah, I see Daniel asked that question, and as you're coming in part-time, Daniel, you may have actual time on your hands. In general, auditing other modules is definitely an option in UCD. It's usually an informal arrangement. You simply go along to the class, ask the lecturer, is it all right if you sit in? The shared understanding, if you're auditing a module, is that you're not going to be more work, so you won't be doing the exams, the tests, and submitting essays. But most lecturers have absolutely no problem with that. It is possible to formally enroll for auditing a module outside of your program. That then is listed on your transcript, but nobody cares about that. It doesn't really matter. So on an informal basis, the way most people do.
Perfect, yes. And I'll just put this last question to Lisa. Would there be a recommended reading list prior to choosing your subjects, just to get a more in-depth view of the module content and such, if you're choosing a master's program in the School of Philosophy?
Yeah, it depends on the module. So each year we will have a number of new modules, and so those reading lists will become available over the course of the summer. But some of the more established modules will have reading lists available through SysWeb, I think, or through the internal website. So you'll get a sense of what's covered. But as Roland was saying, we're currently finalizing our timetable, and some reading lists will change each year. But you can always drop a line to the relevant module coordinator and ask them for a suggested reading list or an introductory text, and they'll be more than happy to get back to you with some suggestions.
That concludes the questions for today, and I'm going to thank all our panelists. We have Professor Brian O'Connor, we have Professor Roland Stout, Dr. Lisa Forn, Associate Professor Fred Cummins, I beg your pardon, from UCD, and I'd like to thank you all for your contribution. And if anybody has got any questions they'd like to put to our panelists, I've popped the details in the chat box there, and so please feel free to reach out. And the recording will be available afterwards, and we hope to see you in UCD in September. Thank you very much for joining, everybody.